Hello everybody and welcome to the weekly old school live stream Q&A. I'm your host, Mod Ayiza, and I'm joined by the wonderful Mod Arcane.
Hi.
And Mod Husky, who is also wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Hey.
You're welcome. I guess I'll ask how you're both doing, but I think I know how this is going. How are you both doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm a bit nervous, I don't know, no reason in particular. Just excited, mainly, yeah.
Okay, good. You've been up to anything interesting this week, Arcane?
Been working more on combat achievements, started the task list design. It's getting really juicy. I'm excited to show them all to Husky, and then he rips them to shreds because he hates all of them. But I'm sure they'll be good. He has good ideas too.
Oh dear. Well, how are you doing, Husky?
Yeah, I'm good. I've been apprehensive all day, I suppose is the way to put that. I'm sure, given chat spam, they've read the blog that we put out, and it's been a case of, okay, we're doing this, but let's brace ourselves, I suppose.
It's a great way to describe it. Brace yourself. I haven't stopped sweating all day. Oh dear. You done anything interesting this week, Husky? I've seen a few good screenshots from you that were rather humorous.
Yeah, so I put out a tweet earlier in the week saying I was going to be moving over to helping Arcane with the task design. We're not going to be doing that till tomorrow/Monday. I've been working on the 8th Old School birthday event, which should be coming out. I don't know when that comes out, but it'll be before long. I had to finish that off before doing combat achievements. That's been a lot of fun. It's a very light-hearted and silly event, which I think is what they all are. But I don't think chat care about hearing about that right now.
Well, we're going to have to listen to a few more things because before we get into the thick of it, there's some announcements that I need to get through. So let's get straight into it. ! Game update in the chat. We've got a nice little script here, and unfortunately no Kieran to read it out, so you have to do with me. Get your butterfly nets at the ready as we're going impling catching. Head on over to your nearest crop circle and check out all the latest changes to the Puro, and more, thanks to this week's game update. Well, thank you, this week's game update. Use ! Game update to find out more. Now, for most of you, you're aware, ! Equipment in the chat. As Old School nears its 8th birthday, it becomes increasingly important to make sure we're looking to the future. Power creep, buffs, nerfs, we've seen your discussions, and we have a proposal that we think is key to the game's long-term health. So read it all by using ! Equipment, and we will obviously be going over quite a lot of that during today's stream. So I'll just preempt that if we don't get around to answering a huge amount of questions as a result, I apologize, but we'll save them for the next stream. Okay, next one, ! Poll. Our next big poll is now live. If you haven't already, visit your nearest in-game poll booth or use your account settings menu to cast your vote in poll 74. A lot of interesting things in there, some game improvement changes, stuff with the collection log, and just other general content things as well. So, yep, ! Poll for that. And I've been told to leave this one, but I really wanted to use it as a way to just show what I purchased myself. So ! Merch. If you haven't got yourself some Old School merch yet, then why not? Head on over to our official store where you can find a range of items to showcase your love of Old School RuneScape. Like this pin that I bought, which I can't see actually if you can see it on the screen because I've covered up my camera with the script. And this pin that I bought. And this pin that I bought. There's more, so I'll stop there. But yeah, ! Merch. Grab yourself some pins. I think all the limited edition ones are sold out now, but there are still some fancy ones in range, as well as the in stock. Sorry, as well as the Old School anniversary pin, which is awesome. So, and no, unfortunately, no employee discount, but it is what it is. Okay, so we have a lot of general questions in here, but I do think it is worthwhile that we talk about equipment rebalance just for a little while. Until we can't speak no more, at least, because it is being mentioned in the chat a little bit. So let's talk about it. We obviously put the blog out today. Something that's been in the works for many years now. I remember when I was back at Jagex in 2017, there was talks of equipment rebalance and looking at different items and changing them to better reflect their strength and stuff, and kind of been ongoing since then. And obviously, why now? Well, we know that Combat Achievements is coming out soon, and Combat Achievements, it's in the name. It's all about your achievements in combat. So if we were to make any changes prior to that, post that coming out, it would nullify a lot of the achievements that you're getting there. With the current changes that we're looking at, that we're already going to be looking at making some currently accessible speed completions inaccessible potentially. So we didn't want to further amplify that with combat achievements release. So it seemed like a really good opportunity for us to bring it forward. The design was essentially ready, just a few minor tweaks that needed to be done, and the blog to be written. So that's what's happened. It's out now. Is there anything that you want to bring up yourself, Arcane or Husky, first? Or I can start pulling out things from the... now is it over 1,000 yet? Yeah, we've got over 1,000 comments in an hour on the Reddit thread, so that's going to be keeping me busy. Thanks, chat.
Yeah. We're going to be reading all of those. And I think that, like, just to touch on what you said there, this isn't a case of, oh no, combat achievements is coming out, we need to, like... It was more that this was already in the works, and the ordering felt better to make sure this came out first, right? It's not that we're ever going to be worried to say this combat achievement is slightly harder because of a tweak down the road, right? This has been something that has been bouncing around the team for almost basically since I joined. I've seen this going around, right? It's just that, you know, we really felt like this should be done before then. But yeah, just before we get into the discussion, guys, this is a blog and this is a proposal, right? While it isn't being polled, like Ayiza said, and I'm sure a lot of other people in the team are going to be reading all these things and trying to get a gauge for what the community feels and trying to engage in healthy discussions about all of this, because we love the game, you guys love the game, but it's never nice to have to stomach things like this, like nerfs, right? And there are going to be some people who are just... People don't like when you make something they're using weaker. And if people are just saying, like, don't do it, I hate it, stop, we're probably not going to look at that feedback other than, okay, there's one person that's angry, move on, right? What's the next person saying? And maybe a mental thought in the head of how many people are angry, right? Having healthy discussions.
Not really much you can do from that kind of feedback is that it doesn't provide anything in the sense of what changes could be made. It's like, okay, so it's either we do it or don't do it in that position. Is there a way we can compromise? Is there a way that we can make it so you are still happy, but it's still not as good, for example?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll speak on.
No, I chat saying one person. I know. I'd say we keep a mental total of how many people just said they were annoyed but didn't leave feedback, right? And like, okay, that gives us a general. Just it doesn't give us like things to change, right? It doesn't say, hey, I agree with the nerf, but the nerf is too much, right? That's meaningful, right? And maybe give us an idea of how you'd want to fix it. Anyway, I could go on for ages, but that's just my opening sort of thing before we get into this discussion about what we're doing and why.
Cool. Anything you want to add, Arcane, before we bring up some of the points?
Yeah, this is obviously going to be controversial to say, but overall, I'm quite happy with the feedback received so far, either suggestions or implementations, or the amount of people that have actually come to us and said, we're happy that you're doing this. Like, this blog is a really good step in the right direction. But then I've obviously provided some things that they think like, oh, this should be tweaked, this should be tweaked. Obviously, the blowpipe is the elephant in the room here, and we're obviously going to get into that soon. But I thought this was going to go down a lot worse, personally. like almost no positivity. Like, this was never going to be a happy blog. Like, things are getting nerfed. There's a lot of buffs in the blog as well. Obviously, nowhere near as meaningful. But considering how strongly some of the propositions are nerfing things, this isn't as bad feedback as I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, it's about what I expected. The majority of conversation is focused on the blowpipe, you know, and rightly so, because it's one of the most one of, if not the most popular weapons in the game, and it's used by almost everyone. We even touch on that in the blog. So it's absolutely no surprise, you know, coming to us that it's being received the way that it is. It's just, yeah, the main focus is really going forward is like, okay, cool, how do we address all of that and make something good? And as Husky touched, we always, well, I don't know about always, but recently, you know, we put out blogs, we give a really good window of opportunity for feedback, make changes, you'll see revisions, and that process will continue until it seems like we're in a good enough place where there is a healthy balance. So one of the things that I do want to cover first, so we've got some questions that have already been gathered. These are things that have been pulled out from social and also from chat. So if you have any specific questions that you want to ask, at oldschoolrs in the chat. Apologies to the production team. I'm going to freestyle this one a little bit, so I'm not picking anything from the document. Just wanted to cover a couple of things, maybe some misconceptions and such. So we already touched on the idea that this was just kind of like forced in with no for, and it's just kind of one of those things that's happened. It's definitely not the case. So let's talk about, in particular, the blowpipe. So obviously with the blowpipe nerf, there is a large amount of feedback that we've got at the moment coming in where players are talking about the fact that for many years we've designed content around the blowpipe so that the blowpipe is usable, and now we're looking to nerf the blowpipe without making any changes to content.
You want to take that first, or will I?
Go on.
So I guess, well, I guess the point is that true? Is that the case? Have we actually designed content around the fact that the blowpipe is meant to be best in slot at these particular pieces of content, or is there a different thing that's going on?
I mean, I've not been around for too long in terms of designing PVM content, so I can't say from the dev's intent, like, oh, this piece of content is like only for the blowpipe or anything like that. But from someone who's played the game a lot, I don't think any piece of content all of a sudden falls over because the blowpipe loses maybe 10, 15, 20% DPS. Like, there's nothing that all of a sudden becomes undoable. Like, while some items might be better in certain situations, blowpipe is generally going to be better, good where it is good right now. It's just not going to be as good.
Cool. Anything you want to add there, Husky?
I think that it's interesting when it comes to designing content, because it is always that elephant in the room at the back of your head. I remember when I was designing Sarachnis, which nobody really cares about as far as what its balance is, but I remember setting its range defense like 200-300, and just still finding out blowpipe with rigor was better than scythe, right? Or something like that, right? It is something that's like, you have to really force in to make the blowpipe not good at things, right? You need to give it extortionate defense numbers in order for it to be there, because everything sort of stacks, right? You've got rigor, you've got the blowpipe, you've got like really high level darts and the fast attack speed. Yeah, it's kind of like, it does... Content has always had the blowpipe in mind, but I agree with what Arcane said in that, yes, some things will be harder. People in the chat are screaming Inferno. Inferno is not impossible because of the blowpipe not existing, right? And I'm not talking about 40 combat accounts being able to do it. I'm talking about the fact that Inferno mostly requires you to be good at managing your resources, prayer flicking, and how you deal with the creatures in what orders, how you lure them, how you react to the spawns, etc. It is going to be slightly harder, yes. I'm not going to dispute that. But it is not, like, blowpipe DPS is not usually the deciding factor. Like, if it is, then there were probably other things you could have improved to fill that like gap, if that makes sense, right? Like, if you were reliant on blowpipe's DPS, there are other things you can improve.
Okay, that's fair. So I guess leading on from that then, because I think it's one of the points that will get raised next, is in terms of how fast you can complete the Inferno. And that's obviously something that's going to change, as well as many other records that currently exist in game that may not be obtainable again with these, with these balancing changes in mind. And kind of like, what do we have in mind in terms of combating that? I know we've had some discussions, and it was something that we did want to include in the blog, but it was just at the point where, because we're not, fully decided yet in which direction, it's more of like an open-ended point at the moment. So let's see what the community feel. But do you want to maybe comment on that one a little bit?
So this is around personal bests, right? Like, certain times are just going to be...
Yeah, personal bests.
So let's take the standpoint that, let's theoretically say that blowpipe is a 15% overall DPS nerf in the Inferno with Dragon Darts, which will be roughly correct. Don't exactly quote me on that, but all the people that are screaming 50% nerf, 40% nerf, that's not true. It's around 15 to 20%, depending on the monsters that you're using and the gear that you're using. Monsters that you're attacking and the gear that you're using. So let's take the number of 15%. Obviously, you're not using blowpipe the entire time. Like, you can use T-bow and stuff like that for speedruns. We don't really expect many people to be speedrunning without a T-bow, since the best times are not too relevant anyway. If you don't have a T-bow. But let's say you are blowpiping the entire time somehow, even on Zug. So theoretically, your speedrun, the world record, is 15% slower. That is just going to have to be something that people are going to have to accept. The items are getting nerfed, PBs are going to be slower, world records are going to be slower. We've had the same in the past with when Elite Void got nerfed, Void Range. That was a 20% damage increase to, 12.5% now or whatever it is. That was a significant nerf, and all the world records at the time technically got worse. And I think, whilst we're in a position now where so many more pieces of content have been added, so it's a much bigger deal than just like 5 caves or whatever, having its world record revoked somewhat. We're going to have to just go forward with that. Whether that's we resetting everyone's personal bests, or we store your current personal bests somewhere so you can look at your past personal bests or something, and then we reset everyone's going forward, or if we just end up leaving it and people have personal bests that they can't realistically achieve again. But that's not to say that those personal bests can't be achieved ever again. Like, people keep talking about like the current, the present, and like a post nerf or whatever. Like, we're not thinking about like a year from now. Like, eventually we're going to release content, perhaps even a new raid one day, and it's going to have items in it, and these items are obviously going to have a much more, it's going to have a bigger avenue of opportunity to provide things like range strength and more range accuracy and all these different things, new ranged effects, because of this nerf. We get such a bigger avenue of design space because of this. And eventually, then world records are probably going to be hit again. So it's not like all of a sudden what is the personal best for the world record for Inferno right now? Like 48 minutes or something ridiculous. That world record will probably get hit again regardless, like one day. So it's not like we're never going to see it ever again.
I think maybe the issue is probably a bit amplified at the moment because of the general lack of, the feeling that there's a general lack of like new high-end PVM content coming out. So for the high-end PVM players that exist, obviously your focus at the moment is getting as efficient as possible and completing bosses as fast as you can, as well as raids and such. So, we completely relate with that. Yeah, just one of those. I do like what you touched on though, Arcane, about the potential of storing old PVs. Having the old PVs stored so that they're still there, so you can still see them, that they existed, and you can still have that as your achievement and a nod back to it. But then having new ones for the new gear and such, especially with the release of combat achievements.
That's something we definitely want feedback on, because Arcane and I have spoken about what do we do with PBs. Is it like, here's your real PB and here's your like current attainable PB? We want feedback from the players, because we don't actually know what the best way to handle that is. But certainly for things like combat achievements, like getting this out ahead of that allows the dust to settle enough so that we know, okay, before we might have made the Inferno time this, but now we're going to make it that, right? I think one thing I would like to touch on here that hasn't really explicitly been said, but like why, right? We're talking about like it won't be as bad as you guys think. We're talking about like the Inferno, and like I know I shouldn't let people see it chat down to the skin, but Arcane has so many Inferno completions. Like he knows what he's talking about in regards to that. I have one. I admit I'm unpracticed, and I did it only 5 times in Trailblazer League, and I'll probably do it again with the nerf blowpipe, right? But all of this aside, the reason the blowpipe and why we looked at it, and I think a lot of people in the community kind of know this themselves, right? It costs anywhere from 3 to 6 mil bouncing between whatever the blowpipe sells in the current economy. I think right now it's in the 4 or 5 mil range, right? And don't quote me on prices, it's not important, it's that ballpark, right? It is so globally dominant everywhere, right? There isn't like a single, like, if you look, okay, it's good at general Slayer creatures. There's so many pieces of content, you just take the blowpipe. It significantly beats out alternatives in other styles. It significantly squashes anything we want to do for ranged, right? And this isn't just, oh, we wanted to put the +2 strength things in Theatre of Blood. And I say we as in the team, I wasn't part of the team then, right? This is like, people have said to us in the past, hey, go buff the Crystal Bow, right? And we're looking at the Crystal Bow, and we're like, okay, this Crystal Bow and Crystal Armor, looking at it, it's supposed to really sort of benefit having high accuracy, right? But the blowpipe's already pretty good in places where defense is average, like, is like average and a bit more, right? Like, there's nothing in the game that has such obscene ranged accuracy that isn't, like, just more susceptible to ranged or magic. So the Crystal Bow has no real niche because of that, right? And then you look and you go, okay, so we just increase its damage. And then you're like, okay, so are we making it equal to blowpipe numbers? Are we making it better? Should it just be a better blowpipe? Should it be equal to a blowpipe? But crystal armor costs like so much more. It is so much more to maintain, like with the crystal shards and stuff. It sort of gets to like, there's actually no gap for this, right? And the way we looked at the blowpipe and a lot of our internal discussions were, we're actually okay with the blowpipe existing. As we said in the blog, we didn't want to go down to the nerfed attack speed. What we wanted to do was say, hey, what if the blowpipe just really excelled over any of the ranged alternatives when the creature has lower defense? Which you're going to be doing for Chambers of Xeric and things like Theatre of Blood anyway, right? People are still going to be taking their hammers and their BGSs into Theatre of Blood. It's still going to be a really solid weapon for that. It just means that we've actually got like room to say, okay, blowpipe's accuracy is worse. It's good. It's going to be really good if you can lower the defense to a certain range or against creatures that have lower defense. But in cases where you're not doing that, in cases where creatures have higher defense, you'll consider bringing a Crystal Bow, right? And we do have in the blog about a 5% damage increase because we feel like it doesn't really need more than that right now. I think it's a lot of changes to do it once and a lot of reshuffling, and it's better to take it small bits at a time. But this sort of says that you've got that sort of opportunity to have high accuracy matter, right? I think one of the common feedback points we've had from the blowpipe, I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it on Reddit, is, hey, I think you've nerfed it a bit too much at the top end, right? Like, oh, is 4 max hits enough? And we've spoken about this. Well, actually, maybe that's really good feedback in that we don't need to nerf Rune and Dragon as much in range strength, but we'd probably still keep the design philosophy of its accuracy being lower, right? Because that is a much better idea for this niche of a weapon and that's consistent with darts, right? Darts are a 2-tick weapon that are trash, right? Why does nobody use darts? It's not the attack speed, the blowpipe that's making it so strong. It's because blowpipe has 60 accuracy thrown on top of all that, right? You know? So yeah, this is kind of why the blowpipe got nerfed. And people will compare, twisted bow and make it more like higher tier weapon. It's just so cheap for so powerful. Like, I want to bring that back to it. It sits at such a low budget range and is so globally dominant that it comes back to that. Twisted bow is something that is like easy to control for us. It sucks at some places where range is good because the magic level just isn't there. It's easier to control in that way, and it's got a nice niche. Blowpipe just doesn't, right? It didn't have a niche. It was the meta, right? I hope that rant kind of makes sense. That's me trying to summarize why we're doing this. And this isn't, hey, this is Husky doing this. Hey, this is Arcane doing this. I've seen a lot of people targeting us specifically in the chat. This is something that we have worked closer with, maybe, but has been bounced around the team for like a bunch of feedback. And we've had people tell us that some of the other suggestions, we were originally going to nerf the attack speed. And a lot of team feedback was we don't want to do that. So there's been other routes we've gone to, right? Like in terms of like, this has been a long-term thing in discussion, and we want to hear your feedback. We want to hear what you guys think about these changes. What we don't want to hear is, fire these guys. These guys are trash. They don't know what they're talking. Like, come on, guys.
I've been there, done that. It doesn't work, all right? It doesn't work. Your petitions won't work.
Yeah, I know. I'm still going to get flamed regardless, and people are going to hate me, but like, engage in the discussion, guys, you know?
Yeah, that's it. I know obviously there's a lot of talk in the moment in the chat about polling it. There is a section regarding the reasons as to why. I'm not going to just go through them now on the stream. If you want to read the reasons, I'd suggest going to the bottom of the blog and having a look, just because that will literally open me up for the rest of the stream being abused. But yeah, have a look at the blog, have a read through, and if you still think that it's not the right reasoning, then as Husky said, let us know constructively, because that's what helps us the most. So. Yeah. There are a few questions that I want to cover off that have came through that are regarding equipment rebalance, not necessarily related to the blowpipe. I think what you said there, Husky, was a really good kind of like summary of the reasons as to why. I think Arcane, you touched on about the damage not being as much, as much of a nerf as what people are on face value assuming. I think for the most part, if you're, say for example, if you're a casual player that takes your blowpipe with you to every single Slayer task because that's just what you do and that's what you're used to, you're going to have the same cozy gaming vibes as you did before. It will be very minimal difference in terms of the actual damage output that you'll be having there, genuinely. Looking at the way that it was balanced, it was mostly around about the fact with high defense NPCs. So one thing that I'd like to say, just to kind of like close that off, is that there's been a huge amount of feedback for it. A lot of people have mentioned it, and I do think it would be very worthwhile us doing. I can't guarantee it yet because we haven't had the opportunity to be able to talk to the entire team and look at resourcing and stuff. But I would like to maybe look at the possibility of having a like a test world available before we were to actually make any changes live in game, so you could test it, you can get a feel for it, and then actually just kind of like, I believe that's going to give you the best example of what it's like rather than reading it in text. Even if we added in what the actual nerf is, you're still not going to believe us. If we gave in the specific pieces of information without leaking the way that combat works, you probably won't believe those stats either. So I think it's best that you get a chance to play for it yourself. So that's something that we'll be looking into and investigating to see if it's a possibility. And yeah, that being said, I'll move on to some of the other questions, because some really good points that have been raised that are aside from the blowpipe, because there is obviously a lot more than that in the blog as well. So one of the ones that I want to bring up, I said good points, so I'm going to bring up like a not the best point, but this is question number 4 from chat questions for those running the behind the scenes, from the Splash Family TTV. Why not fix Basilisk Knights instead of nerfing the jaw? Make the bind attacks deal 10 DPS so you can't just AFK them. Fix the monster, not nerf the items.
And the reason that the item is getting nerfed is because it's a best in slot, helm slot item from effectively a level 60 Slayer monster. These monsters are a bit all over the place in terms of their Slayer level, the difficulty of the monsters, like stats and everything, and then the actual item that they drop. So this is still going to be an extremely good item, and it's effectively best in slot in some circumstances. If you don't care about the defense, you don't want to use the scale cost, and you don't want to have negative ranged and mage accuracy. So it's still going to be a really good item. It's just not going to be the best in slot Slayer item, strength item. Sorry. We are going to be looking into the monster's entomb attack, so you can't just auto retaliate out of it. Because right now, if you ever auto retaliate on, the special attack never does anything, which is just silly. So we are going to update that. But overall, I think the changes proposed in the blog is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think I would point that special attack is now only going to exist on the superior as well. Like, we are fixing the creature. We are going to substantially lower their stats, and we're going to make them more like a level 60 Slayer creature, right? Because there were two options with that, right? You either increase the requirement or make the creature stronger, whatever, and make it actually properly up there, right? At where face guard should be, or you take it down. The face guard down. The team had a lot of back and forth on this, right? There are people on both sides of this argument. Generally, it felt like more people were saying, let's just reduce the strength. And then Serpentine Helm is still going to be better, right? Because it has the Venom, it has better defensive stats, but it has an upkeep cost, right? This is going to be a much cheaper helmet for the same strength, just less sort of utility, right? And the Venom effect is still useful in some places, right? You know, at God Wars and such. It's obviously less useful in, we basically make most bosses these days immune to Venom. But there were two ways we could have gone with that. Some players are going to say, go the other way. And I imagine if we'd polled it as, here are tier 80, 86 creatures, we would have had people say, why didn't you just reduce the strength requirement of the face guard? Right?
Fair enough. Thank you for that. So the next question comes in from Scotty, who has asked, will PVM diaries be balanced around these new gear stats, namely Inferno PB is required?
Yes. That's kind of why we're doing it now.
Cool. I guess that makes complete sense. Thank you for that. That was a really easy answer. All right. So the next one coming in from, there's a lot regarding the blowpipe, but I feel like we covered a lot of the blowpipe. Okay. So question number 10 from Drankly Sol. How are you justifying how this changes everything for newer players? Doing things like Zora and Inferno will be almost a completely different thing with these nerfs.
I think this is one that's hard to argue because we've done the math, so we know exactly how much harder, say, Zora or Inferno is going to be in terms of that. But from an emotional, in a player standpoint that, say, hasn't really done a lot of Zora or hasn't got their first Inferno cape yet, it is going to just feel unfair, right? Where it's just this content is already really hard in my eyes is now even harder. I'm not really sure what we can really do about that. We do really need to nerf the items, and this is the unfortunate consequence and side effects of it. Whilst the numbers that we proposed in the blog today aren't necessarily going to be the final numbers, so we might find some sort of middle ground so you won't feel as bad about it. I imagine that this feeling, regardless of the numbers, is still going to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we covered Inferno before, right? I don't think any of us are saying Inferno is easier because of this. We're not going to say it's just as... It's going to be slightly harder, right? We emphasis on slightly there, right? Zulrah has two phases that you mage. Especially if you're lower, right? You'll use a Trident of the Seas or something. One phase is range, and the blowpipe is still good against that, right? It's not going to be just as good, but it's still pretty good. That thing has low range defense. This is exactly what we were talking about. I think the edge case is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Arcane, I think Twisted Bow beats out Blue Phase Zulrah now, right?
Yeah, so before Blowpipe with Dragon Darts is better than Twisted Bow, but Twisted Bow with Dragon Arrows will be better now.
Yeah, but the blowpipe is still going to be really good against Zulrah. It might hit a little bit less hard, but anywhere people are saying that accuracy nerf is huge, but things that had low defense, accuracy doesn't, like, that's the point, right? If it has low defense, you don't need the accuracy, right? And that's a form that has no accuracy. The only thing you're going to notice is the strength nerf, which we admit is there because, like I said, it was an all-encompassing weapon, right?
Okay, that's fair. Thank you for answering that. And this one's probably not related to the Zora, so chat, don't roast me, but I did see quite a few people commenting about like, oh, lol, just get T-bow. Like, yeah, you'll be fine, just get T-bow. But one of the things that this change means is that you have more options to use other than T-bow now. There will be alternatives that are just as good, if not better than what the, well, it probably would be better than what the blowpipe will be. Like Dragon Crossbow is a really affordable ranged weapon that really doesn't get used, because why would you use it when you can just use the blowpipe? You just wouldn't. Then you've also got the Armored Crossbow as the next step up. If you want to look at your dragon kind of creatures, a little bit more expensive, but the Dragon Hunter Crossbow, of course, and the Dragon Hunter Lance, those things have their viability now again. Whereas at the moment, there's always that question of, do I just take blowpipe anyway? So, yeah, just covering that one over there. So there's a load of question marks. I have no idea what I'm getting question mark for. I don't feel like I said anything that was wrong. So I'm just going to move on to the next question.
People are just going to be comparing it to what it was before, right? Like no weapon is going to compete with what blowpipe is right now. But that's kind of the point. But what Ayiza is trying to get at is that it's not really about blowpipe or T-bow anymore. It's about blowpipe or crystal bow or dragon hunter crossbow or armadillo crossbow. Like, so many things come to life because of this change and actually have their own place.
Yeah, sure, I completely agree with that. And people saying like blowpipe, I see chat, blowpipes dropping under 1 mil, but things are going to crash with nerfs. They tend to come up a bit. It might not come back up as far as it did before, but even if the blowpipe settled on 2.5 mil, right? That is still an amazingly powerful item for 2.5 mil, even like after these nerfs, right? Like, it's still going to be the weapon that if you rebuild and like go for, you're probably still going to pick it up, right? Like, it's still really good. Yeah, I think people. I think I'd say like it just goes back to what we said earlier in the Q&A, right? It is nerfed, and it will be worse, but it's not as bad as everyone is complaining about, right? It is,
Everyone that had a blowpipe or has a blowpipe right now will have one afterwards. It's not like all of a sudden you're not going to use blowpipe anywhere.
And just remember, right? Like, there are a lot of people right now upset because they've lost money, right? And we're not looking at that aspect of it. We're looking at long-term game health. And unfortunately, when there are changes made to items, people will lose out on the immediate term if they've invested in it, right? And people are going to shout and swear at us and be really upset about that. But this is about, as you said, like, game integrity and about like making sure that we have a healthy sort of ranged meta, which we don't currently have.
Cool, thank you for that. Question 12 on here is from Ohio X Johnny, saying, what about accounts that were already built around certain requirements? And I think this is obviously relating to the tier rebalancing. And maybe it's worthwhile touching on as well, whilst we have the opportunity, like why we looked at tier rebalancing anyway, because I've seen a lot of comments kind of like saying, what's the point in this? It does nothing to, rebalance or prevent power creep. So I just kind of hit you with 2 there, but...
It's okay.
Yeah.
You want it or me?
I'll get a shot. So from a player perspective, I can kind of understand where it's like, this doesn't change anything. The only thing that really changes is the skill guide for most people, because someone who's got 75 range or 75 attack, most of them are going to have 85 or 80, whatever. So from that perspective, it doesn't really change a lot. But from an actual perception point of view, it's quite important to actually have distinguish tiers in our game. So like the fact that we currently have pretty much everything at tier 75, like range, mage, and melee, is just kind of ridiculous. So it's a very like minor thing where it's just kind of like, oh, just get over it. Like, it's just been like that forever. But it's a problem when we want to introduce new content as well. So it's well from the new player perspective when they're looking at these tiers and like, I have no idea which weapon's good. What is the progression here? So the new player perspective is important as well. But when it comes to releasing new content, I think it just looks very, very silly when we decide to then try and release something that's tier 85 or 80, but then it's actually worse than a tier 75 weapon. Like, if we tried to release a tier 80 range weapon right now, it'd probably be worse than blowpipe because we can't really introduce anything better than blowpipe right now. That's not something you guys would want. Do you really want to be able to kill like Bandos and like even faster than what blowpipe can shred through? Like, I don't think that's good for the game. So whilst it doesn't affect many players, I think it has quite a large perception benefit as well as for new content as well. The unfortunate side effect is for pure accounts and PvP accounts built around these. So there's 75 attack pure or 75 attack Zerker, etc. You still have 75 attack weapons to use, of course, but you're probably going to have a couple less. And if your build is really important to have the Rapier or the Blade of Seldor or the Scythe and stuff, I can understand the frustration. But perhaps like that kind of build will just transition, right? So say it's very important for you to use Scythe in your build, then maybe your build will just transition to an 85 attack account. Is that a huge problem? I'm not sure. I can't really empathize too much because I've never played any sort of these limited accounts. But I have heard negative feedback from some people with those kind of builds that they don't want to get any more attack levels. But I'm afraid there isn't really much we can do about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think as well, right? You kind of talk about that, like, do people want a weapon that shreds Bandos? So most people like generally just want more powerful things. But we have an interesting game where we have to be so minimal with our power creep generally, right? Like, there are exceptions there, like the Twisted Bow comes out and it's way in ahead better against some things, and like obviously that exists. But looking at it, like, do we want something that feels tier 90 compared to a Twisted Bow? Like, compared to Twisted Bow at 75? No, like, we really don't want something up there, right? So you could just leave everything at tier 75, but then we run into a problem 5 years from now where you have, like, instead of like 15 items at tier 75, you now have 30. Right, and I guess I just wanted to add that. Everything you said, then you can follow on from what I just said to meaning what Arcane said about having a distinction between the tiers. And it really does say, like, if we come to you guys to, hey guys, we've got a tier 78 ranged weapon right here. It makes it much easier for you guys to go, okay, so this is better than that and worse than that. Right? Right now, it's kind of, okay, do you need to look at the stats and on top of that crunch the numbers and stuff? And like some people will happily do that. Some people happily run spreadsheets for days and tell us the DPS, and we'll do that as well. But like that's not really apparent to, like, I would say a vast majority of the players, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's something we touched on in the blog as well. It does make it very confusing for a lot of players. And to be honest, on that point, is it something that we've been asked to do for a very long time as well? Something that gets brought up like every other Q&A is terms of like, why is this a level 75 item when it's clearly more powerful than that? So it's one thing that has really surprised me, even though I was anticipating the kind of feedback we'll be getting, is I don't want to sound like abrasive by saying this, but there's a lot of like hypocrisy, very hypocritical, that for a very long time it's like, yeah, we need to make nerfs, we need to make changes, we need to rebalance things, and then they happen, then it's like, no, we didn't want nerfs, we didn't want balance changes, we didn't want this. Granted, maybe the blowpipe is maybe a bit more than you were expecting, which completely valid, absolutely valid, take on board all of the feedback for that. But that like instant 180, I was kind of like, oh, okay, you do or you don't. Yeah, that definitely interested me, especially around the categorizing tiers, for sure.
And
right,
I want to remind people that we did say that the feedback about Dragon and Rune being nerfed a bit too much is, in our minds, like, we're going to be considering that, right? So any of you who tuned in or missed that point, right? People are saying, hey, Rune and Dragon are really expensive and they should be that powerful. And I don't think they should be as powerful as they were, like, as they are right now in the game. But perhaps they could be more powerful than in the blog. I think that's reasonable. And I think that's something I'd like to discuss and go back with Arcane and run the numbers and come back to the team and say, here is what it would be in our nerf, and here's what it would be if we did this instead, and go to that, right? But that's not something we can turn around within 2 hours of blog and say, yes, we're going to do that, or even tomorrow. Like, it needs a bit more time. But that's why we're taking you guys' feedback on it, because it's reasonable feedback that Rune and Dragon got nerfed too hard with the darts. And that was something even internally we said we wanted to try and reserve as best as we could while still bringing the blowpipe to where we think it should be. And maybe we've gone a bit too far, because it's really hard. Like, you're talking about like should it be 5% more DPS than in our current proposal, right? Or like 4% more DPS, or there's a line, right?
Perfect, thank you. Next question from In-Service Games. Why are we doing this, but we're still allowing Inquisitor to be almost made irrelevant by mid-level armor like Bandos?
I don't understand this question. Why are we nerfing this, but we're still allowing Inquisitor to be made almost relevant? I don't think Inquisitor is irrelevant.
I don't understand the question.
Inquisitor's technically best in slot melee DPS right now, quite a lot of bosses. The only thing you lose, really, is a bit of slash accuracy, which, if you're using things like Scythe and Inquisitor's Mace, doesn't matter.
And defense.
And the defense and a lot of content, if you're good enough, also doesn't matter. Inquisitor is very powerful and completely deserves the prize tag. And
Bandos is not mid-level armor. Barrows is mid-level armor. Bandos is significantly better. I don't understand the question.
Confusion of the tiers, right? Like Bandos is what, tier 60, tier 65? Barrows is tier 70.
Is it?
It's like, yeah, it comes down to this whole like confusion that we have. It's like,
so is this what the question's trying to say then, right? Like Bandos is tier 65.
Yeah, we come back to the point where our tier system is so confusing. Like Inquisitors is like 35 defense, whatever, but then it has a strength requirement on it as well. So it's even more confusing.
Cool.
Yeah, so maybe that point I made is kind of what the player was trying to get at, right? And like perhaps that is something that I don't think I ever saw that in our discussions. That hey, should we increase the defense requirement of Bandos to match this tier system? Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I don't want to say like whether we should or not in a Q&A, but that definitely is like something that feels like I never saw that discussed at all. And for people like Husky didn't know that, I genuinely thought Bandos was tier 70. Like, God forbid I got a number wrong on a piece of item with thousands of items in the game. You know, people think when you work at the company, you just like inject the code base into your brain and you know everything without like, you know.
It's a daily struggle of mine, so don't worry, Husky. It happens to the best of us. Or the worst of us. Next question coming in from Charion or Charion. Any sort of timeline for changes? Are we looking at days, weeks, or a month plus? I'll speak for a second on this one if that's okay. And you guys can talk on more of a timeline view. But the main priority at the moment is getting feedback. So I would like to say when we're ready. Obviously with combat achievements in mind, not being able to give you an exact date there, but just to say that things are progressing really well and it's not going to be that far away in terms of a release. I'm not talking days or weeks, but maybe in the next couple of months, maybe a few more than that. But it will, I think we're safe to say it'll be this half of the year, right guys?
Yeah.
We can't go with combat achievements until this is cleared first, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, we got a good couple of months, but the emphasis is on when it's ready. So yeah, your feedback is going to be helping with that, and obviously with the amount of comments that we've got across all of our social platforms on the forums as well, there's definitely a lot of us to go through and digest. Which is also, you know, if you're feeling like maybe the things haven't been answered as well as you'd have liked in this Q&A, just remember the blog did only go live like an hour and a bit just before, and whilst we anticipated that, and you know maybe we should have gave ourselves some more time. Also getting like 1,000 comments in an hour on one thread alone is very overwhelming for the size of our team as well. So we obviously need some time to collate that and actually have proper answers to give to you and such, which we will give you in revised versions of blogs and stuff. So, yeah. So the next one that I wanted to bring up, where is it? Oh yeah, here we go. So it's actually the next question on here, Mini Spear. So from Lags a Lot, 2 things. I believe it would be beneficial to poll the nerf percentages. Also, is there a specific reason why for the defense nerf to Dragonhide? It already isn't used as defense armor, so I believe it's not needed. So the poll part, just have a look at the blog, read the bottom of the blog. That's the reason as to why it's not polled and being an integrity change. TLDR, the long-term health of the game is more important, and from previous examples, if I'm being completely honest with you, even in just my time alone, I've seen a lot of really damaging game things that were voted against. You know, things such as the Nightmare Zone fully AFK. You know, players voted no against that on multiple occasions and thought that it was good to stay in there, that you could be 6 hours of complete AFK. So there is a point where, you know, sometimes things just have to be done. Same with Void as well. Like that was very contentious at the time. But look at the position we're in now with the Void nerf. It's still very good. It's still got its place. It's not as good as it was, but it did open a lot of other options as well. So, yeah, have a read at the blog, see that, and then on to the next point then. If anyone wants to talk about the Dragonhide nerf, why are we looking at reducing the melee defense if you don't use it as melee armor?
So I think a lot of complaints we get around Black D'hide is like, oh, I splashed too much on it, right? And while that's true, and it is an issue, it's kind of the point of ranged armor to have good mage defense. So we didn't really want to nerf that too hard, but the problem with Black D'hide is that it has really good melee defense as well, and range defense. So you have this like one armor style that you can effectively camp, you can range and melee in it with no like negative connotation, since it doesn't have negative melee accuracy either. And you have really good defense in all combat styles. So like by making this really significant melee defense nerf, it means someone, if they see you with D'hide, they should probably be meleeing you. And then if you swap into melee gear for the melee defense, then they can swap to mage. It completely enforces a combat triangle again, while currently Black D'hide is just this one item that you put on, and it's just kind of like, well, you're just going to have a bad time regardless.
Yeah, I agree with what Arcane said there. But going on to the whole, back to the other one about the polling the nerf. Like, while we've said we can't poll it, like it's what I've said before in this Q&A, right? We are not dictating this is what is going to happen, deal with it. Like, we don't care. Like, blah blah. Like we've put this blog out. If we wanted to do that, we would have shipped it with yesterday's game update, right? And just said deal with it. We've put a blog out with a bunch of proposals and reasons, and we're talking to you guys in a Q&A right now to say, hey, here's what we would like. Here are the reasons why we've done it, and we would love to hear your feedback on it, right? So while we're not polling it, we are absolutely trying to involve the community in this, right? If that makes sense? Like, because it is your game too. Unfortunately, we just can't believe that 75% of people will vote and say this should happen, and will do that with wholeheartedly none of their personal interests in mind, and for the sake of the game's health, right? And even if 75% of people did vote with the game's integrity in mind, like, how many of those are going to say yes and stuff? Like, it's because like people have different opinions, right? You would need to know that all 100% of players had the game's integrity in mind for that to be a fair thing. So, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. So Hobox has asked, what about improvements to mage equipment according to the combat triangle that would have high melee defense bonuses?
So the combat triangle isn't enforced just by stats. The combat triangle is also enforced by like abilities. So Mage has freeze spells and entangle spells that completely make melee redundant. So this is kind of like the big benefit of Mage. That's the aspect of the combat triangle that's enforced in that specific area.
Sure. I also think it's a little bit wrong. I don't know whether this was just written down wrong or maybe I'm really daft and just not reading it right, but it says according to the combat triangle they would have high melee defense bonuses, but they wouldn't because they're strong against, yeah, I guess it's what you just said there, Arcane was right, is like Mage is powerful against melee because you can have that distance, but melee does a lot of damage to Mage at the same time because Mage doesn't have a lot of defensive capabilities. Even if you think about like general lore and fantasy, you don't really see many, I guess you can get like a battle mage and stuff, but wizards typically wearing robes, and I'd like to see you fend yourself off against, a huge sword to the chest if you're wearing a blue robe. It just doesn't fit. Unless you've got that split bark on, then maybe. And, there's some differences where split bark kind of fits in with the combat triangle. It doesn't have as great magic offensive bonuses, but what it lacks in magic offense, it brings back on general defense as well, so...
that goes all the way back to like traditional fantasy tropes as well, right? Which we don't always follow and stuff, but like I remember even back in like, this is going back 2nd edition D&D, like wizards were terrifying at high levels, but like if a melee closed in a fighter, it was like you were dead. Like it just wasn't even close. Yeah, it's an off-topic tangent, I suppose.
Right, the next question is from Odu Dog. And they have asked, do you think the Dragonbone Necklace will still be used after the buffs?
Well, if it's currently being used, I would imagine it's still being used. But I guess the real question is, do you think the buff does anything? I mean, it's a lot of stats that we're proposing to give it. So if you think that this will make it actually a bit more of a useful item, because I think it's sort of similar to Glory stats. Like it has quite a lot of raw stats, but it doesn't give much strength. If you think, if you guys think that, I think it's 2 strength right now, which is obviously lower than like a Fury or something. If you guys think that this would actually put it in a position where it's a bit more of a contender, as well as actually making it so you could theoretically flick it on, since I think that's a proposition as well. Then sure, I think we can go with it. If you think it's pointless, then we could maybe add a bit more stats on it.
Yeah, I remember at one point during our designs and talking about what we wanted to do with this item, because we had a whole host of items on this that didn't even make it onto the blog, right? And this one particularly, I remember talking about, like, should we make it so you can combine it with a Fury amulet to get Fury stats, right? Like a Dragon Fury amulet. And it wasn't a step we wanted to quite go that much of a buff as well as reducing the effect. Maybe that's something to look at in the future. But it was generally like you're losing too much by having it on. And that we're fixing that by giving it stats. And then now you can flick it on, as you said, right? Like you can flick it on as the NPC dies and get the effect and flick back, right? So I'd be interested to see where this settles. It's definitely not worse, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, the next question comes from Beggar Official, asking, has the team considered doing smaller nerfs and spreading them out over longer periods of time, or are we just trying to rip off the bandaid all at once?
I guess we're trying to rip the bandaid off all at once, right? I mean, we spoke about like equipment rebalancing, and I think the primary part of that was the blowpipe, right? It was, do we want to do something to the blowpipe? We have a few other issues, maybe we want to deal with them. And it was kind of like, okay, well, if we're doing some nerfs, are we also going to do some buffs to help? So I think that, like, it is kind of, let's just deal with this. Let's just get this all out the way at once, right? Because we're going to have lots of other pieces of content throughout the year, right, that we want to talk about and blog about and get feedback on. And if it's intermingled every now and then with another nerf or another buff, it just sort of like it puts a cloud over all the other discussion for something else we might want to talk about at that time. You know, I think it's much better to say, hey, here it's all out. Let's have that discussion now. Let's talk about it, right? And then we can get clear of that and start moving on to other content once we've got this resolved, right? I think it's just generally better.
Cool. You know, one thing actually that I think we should have more talk around now that we've all kind of like spoke about the blowpipe. I mean, it's from a community perspective as well, but please let us know what you think about the other changes, like especially the things to like rune armor, to the rune weapons as well. I know that they might not be as relevant to you and your epic skill levels right now, but do you think they're generally like good changes for the wider player base, for like new players and such? I'd love to be able to go back into the threads and see a little bit more comments around that. I won't be able to grab it all from chat, but yeah, that would be cool. We've got some generic questions that came in. I'm going to wrap up with some of these and then we'll do a final note around equipment rebalance, but just so we get some of them done. Greg3064 asked, and this is in regards to the latest blog that we put out, I'm glad to see the 91 agility shortcut in Pulse 74, since the highest existing shortcut requirement is just 89. Are there any plans to add more shortcuts to make agility in the 90s more useful?
I think we should. I think it... Sorry, you want to speak?
No, sorry, I'm just lost in our QA document. I can't find it anymore.
Okay,
it's up at the top.
I think we should consider adding agility shortcuts. I like that this is... I like the way this one is done. It's very niche. It's not mandatory. You wouldn't want to lock something behind like 96 agility or something like that, right? But it is nice that there is a very small time save, because once you get to the higher ends of agility, there really is nothing to push for. Like, it was like that for a long time at 90 with RD. 92 Sepulchre Floor 5 came out, which is something, and unlocks a nicer training method and access to a good moneymaker and stuff. 91 just feeling like bridging that gap a little bit. I do want to be careful. I think you can very quickly overdo this, but I think that like niche shortcuts that have minor bets, and this is a shortcut players have asked for a long time, right? And I think it's also a lot behind Sins of the Father with requiring that long rope, so it does have requirements that fit a minor time save on a master tier clue challenge, right?
I love the long rope. It's so funny. It's just a rope but longer. Like, who thought of adding that? What a genius. All right. Next question from Gidge Sizzle. Sorry, I apologize. Could we please use onyxes to add charges to a Blood Fury? Making it add 3 to 5k charges to not crash the price of the Blood Shard seems fine, but it would be really good to have an onyx sync.
Yeah, I should probably take this one because I put a tweet about it, right? Because I can't remember who was talking about it on Twitter.
Let's go. It's the Husky show.
Oh my god, I'm sorry, guys. I'll be quick on this one.
Just joking.
Onyx price is tied to Chaos Rune price. The reason Onyxes are so low is because we have so many Chaos Runes in the game, right? It's not that there's no Onyx sync per se, although an Onyx sync would kind of help with that. So what you end up with is that Fury is tied to that price. If you make it give charges to the Blood Fury Amulet, it would also tie the Blood Shard to Chaos Runes, right? Because you end up at a balance of Blood Shard will drop until it's at a point where it matches how good Onyx is, right? Unless you go like the route of like 2k charges, which would currently be about 5 times price difference between the two, which it currently is. At what point it's not doing anything? So I honestly feel like the Blood Shard, like, it's so hard to say what is the economy going to do, right? But given the sheer number of Chaos Runes and Onyx in the game on one side of the scales, and the amount of Blood Shards in the game on the other end of the scale, it just feels like the Blood Shard will be the one that's negatively affected and not the Onyx that is helped. But we have spoken a lot about it internally, and we believe that like that is something we should look at as well, whether it's addressing the amount of Chaos Runes that come into the game or providing other uses for the Onyx or something like that could help it, but not with the Blood Shard, because the Blood Fury Amulet is such a powerful item in like what the amount of healing it can give for one inventory slot, and how like comfy it sort of makes gameplay. If that item becomes really cheap, that will probably not be good for the game, right? So we want to like being at that 7.5 mil ish, maybe 7 mil mark. I think that's what it was last time I checked. That feels like kind of good, right? Like feels about right. And I think that the only people it would really benefit using the Onyxes on more so would be like Iron Men. And at that point, I'm like, Blood Fury Amulet isn't really required for Iron Men at all. Like it's nice for Nightmare solos, it's nice for Nightmare groups, I suppose, as well. But like, you know, you do have that trade-off of like, you know, you do a bunch of thieving, you might get enough to use it at the content you choose to. So that was kind of our thoughts on it. We could be wrong. It could really help the Onyx, but our gut on that was like it would probably hurt the Blood Shard as opposed to help the Onyx.
Cool, that's fair. Thank you for that. Right, so taking it back to wrap things up, let's just finish off with a couple of equipment rebalancing questions. 2 pretty juicy ones here. One is from Good Guy Tex asking, can we discuss the Dhin's nerf? What's the thoughts behind that? It's a tank shield, so why make it worse?
So this came up generally because in PvP scenarios, if you have like Black D'hide and Dhin's on, you're effectively unkillable. If you generally know how to tank a teamer or something like that, as long as you don't get shoved into multi, you're generally fine. So a lot of people complain that like, oh, but you can't catch freezes on there. People with Dhin's, like why can't I hit with range or melee or magic? Because D'hide is making up for all the mage defense, and then you've got the Dhin's for all the range and the melee defense. It just adds up to a point where you're basically risking nothing and you're basically invincible. So whilst it kind of sucks that we've got this like item that's entire purpose almost is to be a very high defensive shield, and we're going like, no, we're going to nerf the defenses. Like that does feel bad from like a design standpoint. That's generally why the range defense hasn't been touched at all. So the idea with these changes is to make it so similar to the D'hide, how we're nerfing the melee defense on the D'hide, to enforce the combat triangle slightly more again. So currently the proposed changes are to nerf the melee defenses by 25% roughly, and to add a negative 25 mage defense onto the Dhin's Bulwark itself. So alongside the D'hide changes, I think this will make people, whilst they'll still have loads of range defense still, and still basically roughly the same amount of mage defense. I think when I was calculating it in some setups, it was around 18% magic defense reduction by adding this minus 25 on. So it's definitely significant. It gives you more of an option. So you're going to land a few more freezes, but you're also going to have a much easier time hitting people who have Dhin's and D'hide with melee. So while your range damage is still going to be very, very poor, you're going to have an option if you're splashing a bunch of freezes to actually go and actually start whacking them with a rapier or a whip or something. Because you've lost a lot of melee defense on Dihn, and you've also lost a lot of melee defense on the shield. So it's just to enforce that combat triangle slightly more. But generally, its purpose going forward, when we look at it, is like it's a range defense shield. That's what it really strives at. And I think it still holds that fine, since we're not touching the range defense at all.
And I think to note, it's still really good at melee. It's about 50%-ish, rounding aside, whatever. More defense than a Dragonfire shield in melee, right? Which is seen as a pretty tanky shield. So it still fills that idea of being a good, big, tanky item. It just feels like the numbers were quite a bit too high. And I agree with what Arcane said. Leave the ranged untouched. It's still good. Teams with ballistas, like, it's still going to be great for, you know? Like, it's still going to be really good against that. But you're going to be catching freezes more often. You're going to be getting AGS spec just a bit more often, you know, and landing through that change. I think, and it generally is not going to impact PVM all that much. I mean, like, people talk about, like, the memes running around the Inferno doing laps with full Justiciar and and a Dhin's Bulwark. Well, that's mostly because of its range defense, right? You're praying Mage, it's not touching, its melee defense is still the same, so...
That's very true. And I think that was like one of the comments as well, just to point on touch on a point made earlier, is that for so long we've had so many people say that the Dhin's Bulwark is useless because defense in this game is useless. But now it's a case of, looking to make a change, and suddenly defense is really useful again. But it is always a difficult, balance to strike, really. But I do think that with the changes to both Dhin's and Dragonhide, that it will allow a lot more opportunity for balance in PvP, and that's what it's focused around. And we don't shy away from that. It's mentioned in the blog that that's primarily the reasons for it. If there were areas in game that did require you to have really high defenses, like what was originally planned for the Theatre of Blood, then yeah, perhaps that would be the case. Something would be different, and we wouldn't maybe be looking at them. But at the moment, that doesn't exist really. I've seen a lot of comments as well about people saying, why don't we just make the stats work differently in PvP? And whilst that on face value sounds like a great idea, it's already confusing enough when items work differently in PvP. We talk about this all the time, but we don't have a great way of showing you how items change depending on where you are. There's no alternate interfaces and such, and it's probably a case of like, well, just update it then so it does that, but it's obviously not as easy. So when you have these like differences, it's like, okay, what if you have this shield that you've bought off the Grand Exchange, you've seen the stats on it, you think, great, that's really cool, I'm going to be able to survive a lot more, and then you take it in and you suddenly realize that, wait a second, this doesn't show what it's meant to be showing. Okay, I'm going to report that in as a bug, and you'll think that that's a bug because there's nowhere in game that tells you otherwise. Even going as far as like, with the VLS in PvP worlds that's currently being polled, like, that isn't something that we necessarily wanted to do either, but it's the only real way that it could see being used, so that it can be used against players. At least in that world, you'll always have the same stats, and yeah, it's a really difficult one. I don't like doing it, and I would like there to be a way that we could avoid that in the future, but at the moment we just have to kind of like work around it. And if there's not a genuine reason to have to make that like a really valid reason for it, then it's best to just avoid it. So yeah. Next question from TM Tiger 16, and this will be the last one before we wrap things up. And that is, how do you address the opinion that this further weakens the trust in the polling system being involved in the game, if things will continue to be passed as integrity changes? Still agree with the nerfs overall, but this affects the player-Jagex relationship. And that's a very fair comment, very valid. And it's very difficult to turn around and on face value like disagree, because you are right, Old School is a game that is built around the community. It's built around being able to poll changes in and out of the game. But it's no surprise when it comes to integrity changes for us now. We've been doing it for years because they are necessary. There are just certain things that as a studio, we have to decide that it is better for the long-term health of the game. Like, if every single thing that was like that looked at the long-term health of the game was decided on the players, then we could be in a position that in a year's time from now, Old School doesn't exist. I don't think it would be that drastic, especially not with the way we are now. But we're already at a point where, if you think about it, let's be real again, I like being real, there's a clear lack of endgame PVM content now that's new. It's been a few years. Yes, we've focused a lot on the mid-game, but one of the reasons behind that is touched on in the blog, it's really difficult to come up with reward ideas and new things that can come into the game that would be fitting from new challenging PVM content. And that's now. What happens in 3 years' time from now? Because we'll see old school being here for many, 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 many years to come. Not just the next 1 or 2, but loads. And if we're already at a point where it's like difficult to come up with rewards that can fit high-level PVM challenges, and for players to feel like they're getting rewarded suitably for the effort they're putting in, then if the changes weren't made and if they didn't go through, how much worse can that issue get in the future? And that's the toss-up that we have to, essentially look at. It's not that it's a case of we just don't care about what you have to say. That's why we're here. That's why we're sat here, taking all of the comments that you send into us, looking at all of your feedback and stuff. It's not that we don't want to get you involved. It's not that we think that we know better than you do in every situation. But when it comes to, securing the health of the game in the long term for the foreseeable future, there are just times where we have to just bite the bullet and do something that doesn't necessarily go into a poll. But again, as I said, that's been something that we've done for many, many years now. It's just, I think, a lot more amplified at the moment because of the fact that the changes are pretty drastic, especially for the blowpipe. And maybe if the blowpipe changes weren't in there, it would be a completely different opinion. Who knows? It's hard to tell. But yeah, I would like to think that. Sorry, Husky. I'll give you a second. I promise. I would like to think that from all of the work that we've been doing recently, and seeing how proactive we've been in terms of coming forward with blogs and polls and the edits and changes that we've made and the feedback, how those have been reflected in the poll results and such with the pass percentages, goes to show that, we do care about what you have to say, that we do want to take everything that you have to say on board, that we are here to support you, and that trust can maintain. And especially having this player Jagex relationship, that is the foundation of old school. And I believe everyone else in the team would agree. And you've read all the gazettes, you can see everything that Mike D has ever mentioned, as the product owner and such. So, yeah, I can't really say much more than that.
Can't say it better.
Okay. Well, does anyone have any closing words?
Thanks for the feedback so far, and please keep it coming. I think all of us are going to be on social media for the next few days, actually going through everything.
Sure. Do you know what? Hold on one sec. Can I just see if we can close on on a light note? Production team at the back. Are we okay to go through the user-generated content, the 5 images? Okay, great. So we've got a couple more minutes. All right, so we'll close on a light note. We've got some community content we wanted to share with you. So the first image coming up here is from Anastania, and this is a model of the Mimic boss, the Mimic chest that they created, whilst fishing at the same time. Absolutely incredible. And then the second one that comes through is from ABS Boxing TV from Reddit as well. And the title is, "Yo, who wants to meet me at Fally for my drop party?" It's like a custom pop figurine. Pretty cool. User German Dental Work. Interesting name. I wonder if the profession matches the username. Woodburn Old School Character. That is pretty sick.
That's really cool.
And then the next one is from Plushi. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. I apologize. From Reddit, titled, "I made a spirit tree." A hella cute spirit tree too. Look at that. That is what everyone is like in chat right now, isn't it? All smiley faces everywhere. Everywhere you look, just smiley faces.
Oh, it's cozy.
Just looks. Yeah, he looks comfy and cozy.
It's really sweet. Oh, we get a nice zoomed in version as well. I love this. And then if we move on to the last one, this is from Berserker RS. "These lads just offered to buy my girlfriend." So, sometimes the user-generated content is just ridiculous memes. But this was the old school team before lockdown, basically. And now that we can't go to the gyms anymore, we've all kind of deteriorated. But it be what it be. That's just how it is.
I've never been in that much shape, but perhaps I should get in that shape, right?
Kind of get.
I just love the screen grab that they got of Ash's face. It just fits it perfectly.
See, I could work out, but I don't know how I'd get that tall. Like surely I'm just.
Yeah, true. That's the same with me as well, to be fair. I should be like half that height and then maybe. Anyway, that's it. That's all we've got time for in terms of questions and user content. Thank you for that. It was a nice little light note to end on. If you haven't already, guys, girls, everyone, make sure you check out !game update to see all the information regarding the latest update. Lots of changes to Puro regarding crop circles, as well as Soul Wars team balancing as well. We've added the clan portals into there. Exclamation mark equipment. If you haven't read the equipment rebalance blog yet, go ahead and give it a read. Add your feedback into one of the links below the post. We've got Reddit, the forums, Twitter, and then if you're active on all other social platforms, there are posts there as well that you can provide feedback to. We've got ! poll that will give you information regarding our newest poll that is live. Pretty big one. Poll 74 includes a load of different content changes. Account settings menu can be open to vote if you don't want to go to a poll booth. But there's things like the collection log improvements. We've got a new character summary panel that was inspired from a design from Gentle Tractor, as well as some cool cosmetic additions and other game changes too. And then ! merch. If you haven't already got yourself some old school merch yet, then why not? Head on over to the official store. You can find a range of items to showcase your love of old school. Other than that, just a massive thank you to everyone for being constructive in the feedback that you provide for the most part. I know it's really difficult. I know it's hard to control emotions and whatnot, especially when something that you hold very close to your heart is being changed. We get it. We understand completely. It's perfectly fine. It's acceptable. You're okay to be upset. You know, that's fine. Just let us know why, so that we can help make it so that you're not as upset. All right. And thank you to Arcane and Husky for joining me and answering a lot of the questions that I would not have had the capability for doing so. Also, thank you to Spear and Mini Spear for working behind the scenes, as well as Sani and Light for helping out with the chat questions and gathering all of the feedback. Apologies for not getting through all of the questions. We'll try and cover them in next week's Q&A, as we won't have as much as a focus on equipment rebalance. And that's it for now. Have a great evening, everyone. Much love to you all, and we will see you in the next stream.
Bye.